America's evil genius, Travis Cook, back with you for the second half of the Power Hour, the America's Evil Genius program here on Truth Frequency Radio, 90.7 FM in Denver. Eye-gouging, crotch-kicking, no-holds-barred political discussion, and we're glad you're with us here on this Tuesday afternoon, wherever you are across this great nation and around the world. I referenced a little bit earlier the controversy over the Confederate flag down in South Carolina. And it's something that, as I mentioned earlier, has taken on a bit of a life of its own. Everybody weighing in on it. And I have been, for those of you who have followed me on social media, you can always follow me, by the way, on Twitter at @RealTravisCook. Always get some really interesting political discussions going on there, by the way, so it's well worth your follow. Those of you who have followed me on Twitter, even Facebook, have seen me basically take the side of those who wish to keep the Confederate flag flying. I myself have put several posts under the Keep the Flag Flying hashtag, or Keep the Flag Up hashtag. Been involved in some spirited debates this week online about that. And like a lot of other people who have been on that side, I've been called a racist more times than I can count. That doesn't bother me. I'm used to that by now. That comes when you take a vocal opinion in this country, it seems like, on practically any subject. Someone doesn't like your opinion, they'll call you a racist. That's just where we are in America. But I've been called that more times than I can shake a stick at that this week. I've had a lot of people try to lecture me on the Civil War who obviously knew nothing about it. I've had a lot of people try to lecture me on treason who obviously knew nothing about it. I've had a lot of people try to lecture me on a lot of things when really they didn't know much other than what the mainstream media or what Al Sharpton told them. I've had a lot of people try to tell me what the Confederate flag means. Really all they've told me is what the Confederate flag means to them, which of course they have their opinion, and they have their right to their opinion. But that's not been good enough for them. This has been about them trying to force their opinion on me. This is about them telling me what I should think the Confederate flag means. And that if I think the Confederate flag means something else, then by golly, my opinion needs to change. It's what the left does all the time. They've done it in the gay marriage issue. They've done it in everything. It's not enough for the left to say, hey, you have your opinion, I have mine, let's just go our separate ways. No. They are heck-bent, or hell-bent, if you will, on forcing you to acquiesce to their opinion, even if you don't agree with it. That's what they try to do in this Confederate flag case. Well, what I would like to do right now, for the benefit of those of you who either do not understand why some of us respect the Confederate flag, or for the benefit of those of you who may not know your history, or for the benefit of a lot of you who simply are just exist to try and shove your way of life down the throats of everybody else, I would like to take a moment to calmly explain to you why I respect the Confederate flag and what the Confederate flag means to me. Not what your opinion of what the Confederate flag is and not what your projections of that opinion are onto me. No, I'm here to tell you, if you want to have an actual discussion about it, I will gladly tell you what that flag means to me and my background in it. First of all, a lot of you are likely scratching your head and questioning the fact that I would be sympathetic or respectful of the Confederate flag because, as most of you know, this show is recorded in the state of Missouri. And I have been a lifelong resident of Missouri. And so most of you are going back to your history books right now and saying, wait a second, Missouri was not a Confederate state. Why in the heck would you identify with the Confederate flag? Why in the heck would you have any sort of identification with this part of Southern culture that embraces that flag?
Now, it's true. You will not go into any history book anywhere and find one that states that Missouri was a Confederate state. You won't see that. You won't find that. Now, granted, there's an entire sordid history behind that because there was a good chance Missouri was going to be a Confederate state. Their elected government wanted to do so. Then the federal government came in and just removed the elected federal government. Bet you didn't think anything like that could happen in America, did you? Well, it did. But anyway, there's a whole backstory to that and a whole sordid history to why Missouri was not in the Confederacy or was in the Confederacy or whatever. We won't go into that here. But the bottom line is people do not ordinarily think of Missouri as a southern state per se on the basis that we were not in the Confederacy. But I would like to inform a lot of you folks who have never lived in Missouri or never have spent time in Missouri and likely are rather unfamiliar with us by no fault of your own. I would like to inform you and make you aware that Missouri as a state really has a lot of different subcultures within it. You know how you think of certain states, and you think of a certain state as a southern state or a midwestern state or a northeastern state. You know, it's pretty easy to identify most states with their geographic region or their cultural region, if you will. That's not quite as easy to do with Missouri. A lot of people by default think of us as a Midwestern state. And if you hang out in St. Louis or Kansas City, Columbia, maybe you go to the northern part of the state, you'd be right. It very much is like a Midwestern state in those areas. Culturally, morally, the way of life, it very much is like a Midwestern state in those areas. That part of Missouri is somewhat similar in way of life, I suppose, to places like Illinois or Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa. Not all that different. But in the southern part of the state, particularly the southwestern part of the state, down around the Ozark Mountains, down around Springfield in that area, it's a much, much different culture. It is not, it is like being in a different state. And I grew up in that part of the state. I spent my formative years, the first 18 years of my life growing up in the Ozarks, down in that area. And that part of the state is much more like a southern state, you might say, in terms of culture, mentality, morality, way of life, way of doing things. The Ozarks, the southern part of the state, is a lot more similar, if you will, to a state like Arkansas or Mississippi or Tennessee or maybe even Texas in some ways, in terms of cultural attitudes and just way of life, if you will. I have always half joked with people that there is a Mason-Dixon line of our own in the state of Missouri. That Mason-Dixon line is roughly Interstate 70 that bisects the state from east to west. It goes through Kansas City, Columbia, St. Louis, is roughly in the center of the state and goes all the way across. I've always told people that roughly if you go south of Interstate 70, you are in a southern state. You go from the Lake of the Ozarks down south, or a southern state. You go Interstate 70 north, it's more like a Midwestern state. So Missouri is not all one mentality. Missouri is not all one cultural outlook. And having grown up in that southern part of the state, having spent my first 18 years there, I can tell you without any hesitation whatsoever that part of the state has more of a southern mentality. We might not officially be a southern state, but the folks, by and large, who live in that area have a tendency to believe that we are, or at least they, as a sub area, are part of the South. Maybe we're honorary Southerners. I don't know. I've always viewed myself that way. I've always identified more as a Southerner than I have anything else. Well, growing up in that part of the state, growing up in the Ozarks, growing up in the southern part of Missouri. By the way, if you do grow up there, the state name is pronounced Missouri, not Missouri. That's how the Yankees pronounce it. Missouri, the proper pronunciation. If you grow up in southern Missouri, particularly the time I did, late 70s, 1980s, early 90s. You grew up in an era and in a part of the state where it was not uncommon at all to see the Confederate flag. It was around. Of course, you throw in that we saw the Dukes of Hazzard on TV every Friday night with the Confederate flag on top of the General Lee. We all like that show too. But the Confederate flag was around. Maybe it was on the Dukes of Hazzard. Maybe you saw it on a Leonard Skinner album. Maybe you saw it on the mud flaps of a pickup truck. Maybe you saw someone who had a pickup truck with a back glass, a back window that had been redesigned in the Confederate flag. I remember seeing that quite frequently growing up. Maybe it was on bumper stickers. Maybe it was in flags of windows of homes. Maybe for those of us who are professional wrestling fans, it's when we would turn on the TV and see a tag team called the Fabulous Freebirds come into the ring resplendent in sequined red, white, and blue Confederate flag robes. Those things were a work of art. We saw this iconography all over the place in what passed for our pop culture in those days. In fact, I even had an uncle at the time the Dukes of Hazzard was big. I had an uncle who had that Dixie horn that the General Lee played, da 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 da, had that horn in his truck. And at like 7 years old, I thought this was the coolest thing ever. And this was not an uncle, by the way, who was in his 20s. This uncle was like in his 50s at the time. Now, I know that kind of thing probably didn't happen in the northern part of the state. I know that kind of thing probably didn't happen elsewhere in America, but it happened for us. The Confederate flag, or the stars and bars, whether it was actually the Confederate flag or not, a lot of people debated that. I don't want to get into that here. But that flag was around. Very well seen, very well known. A lot of people identified with it in whatever way. But the one thing that strikes me is that growing up, seeing that flag all over the place, seeing it as such a common item that no one dared even have the notion that it could be offensive, just a normal part of everyday life. The one thing that strikes me about that is that today, when I hear so many people talk about how that flag is connected to slavery and connected to racism, if I go back and think of the people that I grew up with and the people that might have had that flag on their pickup truck or had that flag in their window or wherever they might have had it on their wallet maybe, belt buckle. When I go back and think of those people, all those people I met over those years, not one time did I ever hear any of them say anything to the effect of, that slavery thing, we really ought to bring it back. Not one time did I ever hear that. Not out of anybody. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand to some degree the connection of slavery to the Civil War. I'm not one of these people that would tell you the Civil War was fought about slavery. I think it was one issue. But again, that's another debate for another time. The point of this is, to those of us who grew up in the Confederate flag, we didn't respect it. We didn't popularize it. We didn't put it on our pickup trucks and our belt buckles and our T-shirts, etc., because of slavery. Slavery was the furthest thing from our mind. Most of us didn't even do it for racism. Instead, that flag represented something else to us. And don't get me wrong, we knew that there were people out there using it for other means. But those people were so far on the fringes of society, your white supremacist groups and Ku Klux Klans and whatever, they were so far on the fringes of society that you didn't give them any credibility. You didn't reward them by making them seem as though they were a bigger deal than they were. In fact, I grew up in an area, part of the state where the Southern Poverty Law Center has identified as a Ku Klux Klan hotbed. That there's all kinds of camps and headquarters and stuff like that down near where I grew up, and yet the entire 18 years I was down there, I never remember running into a Klan member one time. So if they're down there, there's not very many of them, and they're pretty well hidden, and they have all the impact of non-alcoholic beer. So we didn't pay attention to those very few people on the fringes who used this as some sort of racial ramrod. They didn't even register with us. They weren't significant enough to give the time of day to. Instead, the reason that we identified with the flag, the reason that we found it cool and hip, and part of our wardrobes and part of our automobile accessories and part of our music, was that it identified a different type of attitude to us. Not an attitude of slavery or racism. We didn't really care about that. That wasn't our focus. Instead, to us, the Confederate flag, the stars and bars, represented more of a general rebelliousness, more of an attitude of self-reliance, an attitude of questioning the federal government and their authority, questioning the interference of the federal government or the interference of outsiders in our daily lives. It was a rebelliousness and an attitude of, I can do it myself. I don't need you to live my life for me. I think back to the old Charlie Daniels song, Long-Haired Country Boy. And there's a line in there that says, I don't want to take I always get this messed up, folks. I'm sorry. There's a line in there that says, I don't want nothing from nobody if I can't get it on my own. If you don't like the way I'm living, you just leave this long-haired country boy alone. My apologies to Charlie Daniels for butchering that initially. But that line, that type of mentality was what we believed. And we saw it represented to a certain degree in the stars and bars, in the Confederate flag. The idea that I can do it myself, the idea that I don't need a bunch of people from the outside, a bunch of people from up north, a bunch of people from the government to tell me how I have to live my life, that I don't need a bunch of people from the outside to tell me how I have to think, how I have to behave. If they want to live their lives that way, let them live their lives that way up north or California, wherever they are. That's fine. We're going to live our lives our own way. You go your way, we'll go ours. We all could probably get along that way. That's what the Confederate flag represented to us. Pretty innocuous when you think about it. Or at least it would be innocuous to most people. But I'm here to tell you something. For all those people that have been moaning and complaining all week, all couple of weeks here about the Confederate flag in South Carolina and whatever else, for all of them talking about racism, for all of them talking about slavery, even though nobody anywhere in the country who's defending that flag is saying anything at all about bringing back slavery. Nobody's saying that at all. So the opponents, the anti-Confederate people, are trying to make up an issue where one does not exist. They're trying to fight a battle that's not even being fought, fight a battle that's not even there. Nobody's defending slavery. Nobody wants slavery to come back. They bring up Jim Crow. Nobody's saying that they want Jim Crow to come back. Have you heard that anywhere? Have you heard anyone who is seriously defending the Confederate flag or its flying on South Carolina property? Are you hearing any of them say, you know what? That whole Jim Crow thing, that was a good idea. We need to go there again. Are you hearing that anywhere? If you're honest about it, you're not. So that's kind of the cover. Our opponents do not seriously think that they are fighting slavery. Most of them do not seriously think they're fighting racism. Maybe some of the lower end foot soldiers who don't know any better on Twitter, maybe they think they are, but the people who are really springboarding this, I don't think they thoroughly believe that. Instead, I truly believe that what is most offensive to them about the Confederate flag, the reason they want it to come down, the reason they want the history associated with it to be whitewashed and even expunged from history, the reason that they want to redefine what that flag means for the rest of us, is what I just told you. the most offensive thing to those people is the attitude that I just told you we had in southern Missouri growing up. The most offensive thing to them is American citizens who have a general rebelliousness, American citizens who have self-reliance, American citizens who question the wisdom and even the authority of the federal government over their own state and their own life, American citizens who reject the interference and the influence of outsiders. That is what truly offends them, because they know how hard it is to control and influence people like that are free thinkers and are able to think for themselves and who want nothing from them. We can't be manipulated because we don't want anything from you anyway. That's what's truly offensive to them. That's what sticks in their craw and makes their stomachs turn. Now, a lot of you out there are saying that's all well and good. You can respect the Confederate flag all you want to, but it has no place flying on state property, on public property. I couldn't disagree with you more. First of all, as far as I'm concerned, whatever a state wants to fly or display on their property is the business of that state and nobody else. What Barack Obama thinks about it doesn't matter. At least it shouldn't. He's just another guy. He's just another outsider giving his opinion. Which that and a $10 bill will get you a bus ticket somewhere. It's not the federal government's business. It's not the president's business. It's the business of the people of South Carolina. But more to the point, when I see that Confederate flag flying in South Carolina on the grounds of their state house, the message it gives to me is not one of racism or slavery or whatever. Instead, the message that it gives to me is a far more powerful one, a far more general one, but a far more important one. The message that gives to me is that it's South Carolina's way of saying to the federal government, we will not march in lockstep with you. It's their way of saying to the federal government, we have our eye on you. And if you get out of line, we'll fight you. Maybe not in a physical sense, maybe not in a military sense, but we will oppose you. You're going to have to go through us. We will not simply do what you say just because you say so, just because you're the almighty and supposedly all-powerful federal government. We can think for ourselves. And moreover, this flag is proof that at least one time in the past, we've had the guts to stand up to you and push back. And so when I see that flag on the grounds of the South Carolina State House, or when I see it in the Mississippi state flag and so forth, and I know the connotations with Jim Crow and all that, but there again, that fight is long gone. That fight is over. Nobody is fighting for Jim Crow today. That's done. But when I see those stars and bars represented elsewhere in Southern society today, in 2015, that's the message it gives to me. It is effectively a middle finger towards the federal government. And looking at what this federal government has done, certainly over the last 6 or 7 years, certainly over the last week, but really the past 75 or 80 years, it's out of control. It's trying to destroy the various individual cultures we have, the various individual geographical and cultural traditions that we have in this country, and assume a federal, secular, whitewashed version of American history and American culture, and destroy the things that we hold dear. Now, I'm not expecting all of you to acquiesce to my viewpoint of what the Confederate flag is, or to buy into the reasons that I respect it. You have your opinion, I have mine. I'll be damned if you or Barack Obama or the federal government or the media or gutless businesses like Walmart or Target or whoever or Amazon are going to come down and tell me what my interpretation of that flag is. You want to know my interpretation of it? You ask me, I'll tell you. I just did. So in my mind, if you got that flag, wave it proudly. There's room for you in America. If you're a state that wants to fly it, wave it proudly. There's room for you in America. And let that federal government know. Let those outsiders know. Let those Yankees know. Let those intellectuals, those academics know that our eyes on them. We'll stand up and fight them. We will not be pushed around. Folks, thank you for joining us again on Truth Frequency Radio. It's been a great week. We will see you next week. Travis Cook, America's Evil Genius, signing off.